So in this final part 6 of this series on how to manage overthinking with mindfulness, we'll be looking at how our identification with thought is the key problem to overthinking, and how we are trying to make our mind free by doing less and not more. So what do I mean by doing less and noticing the way the mind already is? So when we're overthinking, we're lost in a train of thoughts and identification. And if we can give thoughts the same credibility we give sounds and smells and tastes, then they will pass away by themselves. They will lose their power over us if we don't identify with them as much. And what there is there's an intrinsic well-being to our mind that's already free of thoughts. And we access this by not identifying with thoughts as much. Let them arise, let them be here. Just see if you could notice them as thoughts and give them the same credibility, as I say, as sounds and smells and sensations. And the way you would do that is by realizing that thought and practicing in this way, that thoughts are either linguistic or imagistic. And what I mean by that is when a thought arises, it's either a piece of language, like a sentence that seems to be appearing in your mind, or it's an image. It's like a screenshot or a photograph of an event that's happened. It's a visualization, or it's some form of written word. And these linguistic or imagistic thoughts are just that. They're just thoughts. And what we're trying to do through this sort of mindfulness training, this next level of mindfulness training, is notice that all of the contents of consciousness are just the contents of consciousness. And we only tend to identify more with thoughts because they seem more personal to us. And they seem to be linked more to our sense of self. And discussions around the self and non-duality and losing the sense of self are things we're going to come to at a later point, and something I'm very passionate about. And that's actually one of the ways I practice meditation, in this non-dualistic way that I learned from the likes of Sam Harris and Locke Kelly and Richard Lang and Jack Kornfield. But for overthinking specifically, our identification is what our suffering is bound around. So when we're overthinking and when we're lost in thought, we're usually overly identified with it, and not just noticing and noting it as a thought, letting it be a thought, just like the sound of traffic or the sound of building work or the sound of anything that's come and passed away. And thoughts, we only seem to linger on them because we seem to loop them around in our brain in these images or words. And we give them feelings, and then they loop round in thoughts and feelings and thoughts and feelings. And what we're trying to do by allowing them just to be thoughts and doing less is noticing that our mind before thoughts is already free of any problem. It's already how we want it to be. So by trying to think our way out of overthinking, or be mindful to get out of overthinking, we can use the methods I've discussed in the previous parts of this series, but the real tool is noticing that the mind is already free if we do less. Meditation, specifically this sort of mindfulness meditation, is not doing more, it's noticing how the mind is before our thoughts appear. That the mind has this intrinsic sense of well-being. Jack Kornfield calls it loving awareness, and the suffering and the negativity and the overthinking appears within the mind. So we're noticing the mechanics of our mind and this association with thoughts and how we intertwine with them and identify with them, and how that causes our suffering. And if we can just let them be thoughts and really let them be images or linguistic or words, and just give them that, don't give them the power over us of being something that is so personal to me. This is just a thought. It's not my thoughts deeply affecting me in this personal way. It's, oh, that's just a thought. I'm going to let it be like the sound of that bird, and then I'm going to carry on with the rest of my life. And if you can notice from this space that's already like that, it's already free, it just comes in, it's unaffected. I love the analogy in Buddhism of the mirror. if the mind is a mirror, it's not changed by what's reflected in it, but it appears in it. So say a dog goes in front of a mirror. The mirror doesn't become the dog, but it's there. So the mind, being already free like the mirror, the thoughts appear in it like the dog, but the mirror, the mind, doesn't have to be changed by it unless we identify with it and say, oh, this is my mind now and these thoughts are really bothering me. So it's our identification around the self that causes a lot of our problems around thoughts that can just be left as thoughts. So yeah, I'm really enjoying this series. I hope you are too. It'd mean a huge deal to me, genuinely, if you could give it a like, a subscribe, pass it around to some of your friends, share it wherever you like, if you think it could help somebody. And let's go a little bit deeper into this and look at how we can practice this and some examples. So we tend to suffer by identifying and associating with thoughts that arise in consciousness on a sort of loop. And I love the example by Sam Harris where he says you want your mind to be like an empty house when thieves arrive at the door. There's nothing for them to steal. And I love that analogy. It also links a little bit to a beautiful quote from Shakespeare where he says, nothing's good or bad, only thinking makes it so. And of course, a lot of good things can come from our identification with thoughts. But in relation to overthinking, a lot of negativity comes from us, the self, me, James, you, identifying with the thoughts that appear in our minds. And there's really two ways to look at this. The first way, you can notice a thought, identify with it, and then act in however way that thought would make you feel. You're at the whim of that next thought. But if you can notice the thought as a thought, before your identification with it, notice it as imagistic or linguistic, a piece of language or a piece of imagery. And then also, this is the key bit, to notice your identification as another thought or feeling arising in consciousness. Then that gives you this mindfulness-based noticing, which is the ultimate form of choice that all your other skills, as I said, your stoic skills, your psychological skills, your behavioral skills, can come in from. So it's noticing that our identification is another appearance in consciousness rather than perceiving that our thoughts are after our identification, or our thoughts have to be identified with. Identification and self-based thinking is just more thinking, and it's the thinking that causes us the most suffering, and it's the crux of our overthinking. So if we can notice that our identification is another appearance, just like the thought, then we have a completely different option. We can either be chasing thoughts, or we can just notice identification as another thought. And that's really the key bit of that, doing less, not more. You're realizing that a lot of our suffering is because of something we're doing more, and that there's this intrinsic state of well-being in the mind that's already always there. Your mind is the empty house, and your thoughts are the thieves. And if we can notice the mind as that clear, unaffected, unjudgmental, compassionate space, the suffering is within it, not as a result of it. And that's the key message I'm really looking to get across to you here, that thoughts have no place to land if we don't identify with them. And one example from me, I have a 6-month-old son. He's playing, giggling, moving around. And instead of my sights and sounds being the objects of my consciousness, what's aware to me, if a thought comes and I identify with it and follow it wherever it goes, it takes me out of the present moment. It takes me out of the rich experience I'm having. But if I can notice this thought and then the identification as a thought or a feeling, I can just let them arise and pass away using all the other tools we've looked at in this series of noting, concentration, impermanence, the space around thoughts. But this identification conundrum with thoughts, overthinking and identification, if that can be noticed from this prior condition, then you can connect with experience in a more clear and deliberate way. And that's really the point in life, of the way I see it, and a lot of the people I look up to see it, is having meaningful engagement and connection with the present moment. So it could be said that there's no meaning without identification, but when you're really engaged in something, that sense of meaning seems to be not at the forefront of your mind. You don't need to have a meaning for a lovely experience with your child or your partner or your family or your friends, and your identification can pull you to the past or the future or just out of the present. So I'm really hoping that this different way of looking at noticing can change your experience, can improve your mental health, can increase your relaxation, reduce stress, give you a greater sense of well-being and kindness towards yourself and others. But on a higher level, on a different level, it can reveal the mechanics of your mind and how your mind is always already free, and that judgment and identification are things that are being added without you noticing them arising. And that if you can just rest your mind in this prior mirror-like condition, it's already free, it's always already available to be noticed, and any judgment, doubt, and thinking about whether this is working or isn't working, either in meditation or criticism about this process just in waking life, is more thoughts and feelings that haven't been identified. You always have this extra move to use this method of noticing identification and noticing thoughts with the same credence, rather than identifying with thoughts at any time. And that's the real message I'm trying to bring home at the last part of this series. And just to wrap up this series, really, we looked at concentration, then we looked at noting, then we looked at training to be in the present moment, to connect with experience and train mindfulness generally. Then we looked at impermanence, and then the space around thoughts, making better choices, and then lastly, identification, and how noticing thoughts, then noticing the thinker and the identifier can be this meta tool for you. So yeah, I really hope this has helped you with your mental health, with your well-being, and start to build in this tool of mindfulness into your daily life, and how it can really help with overthinking as well as a myriad of other things. So until next time, take care, my friend.